for American companies. I think most people would agree that the driver in terms of research products, research use only products, particularly, has been what the US has done with SBIR grants and NIH and NCI, etc. So a lot of small companies were looking for a channel into the European market. We created, first of all, EMS Biotechnology Europe. We did a number of iterations. We got involved in instrumentations at some point and came out of that. We became a very, very specialist reseller, distributor, marketing partner for multiple. That's the reason had worked with Ambien and Vitrogen in the past. So AMS Bio then became a transatlantic company. We opened up in Cambridge, Massachusetts, still got a business there in Cambridge, Massachusetts, because effectively it's a two-way street in terms of technology and products. And that business grew and was sold, as I said, to EQT last year.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Alex. And David.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me. Really excited to be here and participate and support the BioTools Innovator Hub. So my name is David Soper. I'm the Director of Emerging Technology at BioLegend, who's owned by Revvity. So we're a life science diagnostics company. I exist in the life science realm, and specifically I support our reagent portfolio, but I also work with our instrument team in the life sciences side. So my role is to, we have a lot of inbound technologies from universities, established companies, new companies, looking either for investment, for collaboration, and that can be through co-marketing or co-development, as well as potential strategic alignment through an acquisition. And so I have a background in immunology oncology. I've worked in medical devices, clinical trials, and now in the BioTools space. So more of a technical background, from the lab and now onto the business side where I evaluate technologies. So always looking to, what can we offer customers to build, bigger, cooler, simpler, faster solutions for their experimentation. And our goal is really just to support the research community. How can we provide tools so they can get answers and keep pushing that edge of research? So happy to be here.
Thanks, David. And Ross.
Yeah, hi, I'm Ross Bundy, CEO, co-founder of CRISPR-QC. CRISPR-QC is an alumni company of BioTools from 2023. This is my second or third company, depending on how you're counting. I'm not a scientist. I'm the business side. I came from different industries, but partnered with really good scientists to start building my first company in 2013, initially using some of the same biosensor technology I use in my company now. Initially focusing on diagnostics, went through a lot of understanding that market and changed and went into life science tools. Launched the first tool in 2015, merged the company in with another into a company called Cardea Bio, accelerated and expanded the strategy. Cardea was acquired, and as it was acquired, one of my former co-founders and I spun out an application in the cell and gene therapy space. A lot of what we do at CRISPR-QC is to bring more biochemistry and potency capabilities to the cell and gene therapy space. There isn't really any potency assays, which are really critical for a lot of drug discovery. There's no way to do that today. So we're bringing some new data and new capabilities, which sounds really exciting as a startup. It's actually really hard to sell when you're bringing something new that people haven't seen before. We've been through a few iterations, and evolutions of CRISPR-QC. I've recently pulled down all of our marketing and relaunched the entire range of marketing for our company in terms of how we present our value proposition to customers. So I've been through a lot of the things that you guys are all going to go through. So I'm happy to join and share and talk about all the scars and layered scars that I have as an entrepreneur and what I've had to learn the hard way a number of times. And hopefully you guys get the benefit of it without having to incur the cost that I did to learn those lessons. So,
well, thanks, Ross. We appreciate the scars and your ability to share with us.
more scar than person at this stage. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, every company on the call, each of our cohort, they're all looking with a product to sell, to build something that scientists can love and that will help people in the industry and the world in some way. And I think the hard part is transitioning from, that gap to a purchase order, and how do you leverage those conversations and develop those conversations in ways that lead to good outcomes for the company and the user. So last week we talked about marketing and we talked about how to generate that demand a little bit. So obviously this day we'll be talking about closing those customers and those opportunities. So with that, I think let's start with talking about kind of, first off, top of the funnel, qualifying the buyer. How do you guys go about telling a real customer from someone who's ready to buy or just sort of perusing the aisles, if you will, and any tips for kind of getting that first one? And Alex, maybe we can kick it off with you.
Yeah, I think this really is a question that's probably dependent on what you're trying to sell. Often, if you're in a sort of a more fast-moving consumables repeat order type thing, I think you really have a more difficult task there, particularly when you have an introduction of a product. I think it's a little bit easier to qualify a good buyer profile when you've got a higher value product, like an instrument, for example, or a service. Clearly, what you're looking for is to make sure that you're asking them they've got budget, asking them if when the timing's going to be right, trying to get something concrete out of them, trying to understand the real value you're bringing. So, I mean, if you've done your market research properly, you probably know some of these things, but within the sales process, you're always picking up new ways to retune what you've got in terms of your products. And so I think, listening to be a really good listener is a way to pick up what are those signals you're getting back from this particular buyer. Is he able to commit? Those are the sort of things that I'd be looking at.
Thanks, Alex. And Ross, how about you? You've done this a few times.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think the trap that a lot of entrepreneurs, particularly in the biotool space, you're coming with some sort of new science, new capabilities, and oftentimes it's something that's maybe developed under grants and academia and that kind of thing. And what happens is you get really focused on what you do, and then you say, "Hey, I'm going to go to the market and bring that out." But when you go to the market, what you really need to start looking for is why someone would actually need what you have. And a lot of times those are not the same thing. And, we often start with a hypothesis saying, people need this kind of data or they need this kind of capability or that kind of thing, right? But then you go to the market and you find there's other things. So the story I always like to tell is the very first instrument we launched, our technology allowed for a very, very inexpensive instrument that had maybe a $600 cost of goods, but was able to be sold at about $25,000. Chips were a little pricey, but we could at least break even on the consumable side. And traditionally, that tool would be in the biophysical space. So those types of tools, traditionally, you sell to a super user. The tools generally are $200,000 to $800,000. They have highly trained users, biophysicists that use those kinds of things. So we started trying to sell to those people, and they said, "You know what? I already got tools for these things. These are great, right?" And it was difficult for us to really penetrate the traditional way we did that. But what we found was that inside the organization, that specialist user had internal customers. That was his job, is to serve those internal customers. And every single time we ended up talking to the biologist, the person running a drug program, they would say, "I hate that guy. He's 3 months behind on everything. I just want to move forward with my data. And oh, your tool's $25,000 and it's pretty easy to use. I would love for that. It doesn't even have to be as good as what that guy does. I'll use his data. But if yours is comparable, then I can move forward in my programs in parallel." And so very quickly, we realized there was a dichotomy. What we did was real-time biophysics of protein, small molecule analysis, which has a traditional sort of tool space. But our customer ended up being the customer, the internal customer of the people you traditionally sell that to. And why they wanted it is it allowed them to move forward much more quickly in parallel than this sort of bureaucratic structure that was really common in the drug discovery space. And we started hitting sales very, very quickly because we hit a sweet spot in terms of value and enabling people to move forward in their thing. And so that's where I mean, where it's like, we could talk about our great technology and our graphene sensors and biophysics and blah, 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 blah. But the value was it unlocked, this 3 or 4 months of waiting with someone that they hated interacting with and allowed them to move forward. And understanding that shifted our marketing, shifted our positioning, shifted our pricing, and we started hitting good sales, right? But it was that why that mattered. And once you find that why, it also changes what you're looking for. It changes your qualification, it changes your marketing for them to step in and say, yes, that's exactly what I want. They step in, they raise their hand, I'm interested. And the sales process gets a lot easier once that happens. But it is a real difference between why someone actually wants your product versus what you do and the science of what you do.
To build on that, Ross, how did you guys approach? Did you approach industry first or academia first? Was it the same
Yeah.
approach?
So we approached academia with a couple free demos and things like that to see if we could generate some data, generate some papers, build our marketing. And that was helpful and it was not helpful. So when you do free demos, you do learn a lot about how people might use your thing in terms of what they might do. But their behavior changes when you ask them to pay for it. People do all the stuff in the world for free, and a lot of academics will happily use something that's novel and new to kind of add a novelty factor to a paper to increase that impact factor. The benefit you get is they might do some things, generate some figures, generate some data with an outside user that you can use in your marketing or white papers or things like that, or point to peer-reviewed papers if they publish those. But they don't quite give you quite the same cycle. Academics also struggle a little bit. You could go through an entire sales cycle and an academic says, yes, I love this. I'll put it in my grant. And maybe they'll get their grant in 6 months. And your cycle just kind of, you've successfully sold them, but they don't have the budget to buy it until they put it into a grant that they may or may not get. And it's kind of like that cycle gets very frustrating to do that. So they were really useful to get some peer-reviewed papers out, some publications out that supported our efforts, but our market was industry 100% because they just move faster. They have budgets, and understanding how their budgets worked made us sell better, where the decision trees were, where you price changes who makes the actual decision. So understanding even your pricing and getting in with certain decision makers, how the different budgets work and who those people work means your sales cycle goes a lot more quickly. But
Thanks,
yeah,
Ross. Yeah,
industry is just a better customer. I'm sorry to say they just are.
I was gonna say yeah, having a budget is a good qualification step. So,
Yeah, that is a good question to ask right out of the gate. Yeah.
Yeah.
all right. And then David, how about you? What's your thoughts on qualifying the buyer and kind of getting these first units moved?
Sure. So I'll approach it more maybe from, because we've talked about instrumentation from the consumable side. So I would say moving a little into contrast to Ross's point that, and it's been an approach that BioLegend has used since the inception, is that we've always targeted academics. And so the reason is that the academics publish, it's free advertising. Someone reads a paper and says, gosh, I want to repeat that. I can buy that. What is that reagent? Where does that reagent come from? Okay, I'll get it. The other is that all of those academics, and granted it's a longer cycle or lifetime, many of them move on to the industry, and then that's in a variety of spaces, whether at CROs, biotech, pharma, drug discovery. So if they like what you use, or they like what you produce, and they use it, they'll carry it forward with them. And once they cross over from a consumable standpoint, cost is less of an issue once they're in the big company. So they're happy to pay list price without a discount and all of those things. So to try to find those customers, it's a tough balance, interest versus an actual customer. You don't want to give everything away for free, but if you sense that they're really interested, or gosh, I would like to try that, then give them a free sample if your consumable's not that expensive, because everyone loves free stuff. Hey, if you test it, can you share the data with us? Now, you'll get a bunch of people that want stuff, especially new students or new postdocs, because they like free things, but they don't always test it. So that's the balance you have to find of and I always say be curious. I ask people, scientists can't help but talk about themselves. What kind of research do you do? Why do you do it? What are you looking for? And if you've been there and you understand that space, you can say, gosh, I understand some of those pain points. This is what this consumable or this product can bring for you. It's, hear me say this a bunch on this call. What you have has to be bigger, better, faster, stronger, and or less expensive. No one wants to pay more money for the same thing. So you have to be better and you have to be price competitive.
Yeah, I've heard that said before, like, how do you make your customer win? Um,
Exactly.
Turn them into a winner. I like that. So David, you're on the, again, you said kind of the consumable side, and in software development, they say launch as early as possible. If you love your product, you waited too late to get it out there. Tools, I think there's probably a little bit of a gray zone there in terms of like when it's ready. But can you talk about so like you got a new product. How do you know when it's ready? How do you ensure the customers have a good experience, or how do you understand their sort of tolerance level for some of those rough edges that the first units of a product may have?
Sure. And for full disclosure, I actually have a small software team for flow cytometry analysis software. So absolutely, it won't be perfect. Get it out the door, and software you can continue to refine. People will suffer bugs and those kinds of things as long as it doesn't crash. For the reagent side, it's I mean, simply put, I would say put yourself in that customer's shoes. What would you tolerate? So I can't have it fail. I don't want to waste my samples. Talking to some of the teams here, they were saying, well, we have some issues with our reproducibility with whatever the consumable was. And I said, is that across different lots? So then you can just normalize from, lot A to lot B, or is that within a lot? With, oh, well, it was within a lot. And I said, okay, well, then that means you have some consistency issues. So customers want to be able to get reproducible data. If you're honest with them and you're giving something away for free, people will tolerate that a little bit more. If they're paying for it, or it's significantly discounted. If they're paying for it, no one wants to pay for something that might work. And so the best way to me, and again, like I'm on the antibody recombinant protein, that side of things, consistency is the key. Things can vary. You have your tolerance ranges, that's fine, but don't let them drift up or down substantially because the customers will find out before you do, and they will let you know. And when they do, be helpful and provide a solution. Don't accuse them of anything. So it's a lot of, hey, what did you do? How did you do it? And maybe what they did is different than what you did. That's fine. They didn't follow the protocol. Okay, then you can refine your description of how to do it or what to do. But a lot of times we get customers that say, use this reagent, it doesn't work. And when we start to troubleshoot it, we get to I ask specific questions. Well, actually, I didn't do the experiment. This other person did. And so then they go talk to them and they go, okay, they didn't follow the protocol. So it goes from it didn't work to we didn't follow the recipe or the protocol. And 9 out of 10 times when you solve the customer's problem, you never hear from them again. You hear the complaints, but you don't hear the positive side. So
Thanks.
Jim, if I could just add
Yeah.
to that, I think that's really good when you're in the reagents business, and the reagents business is massive in terms of the number of users. The number of antibody users is thousands, etc. I think if you start thinking about kits as something a little bit more complex, you really need to have a robust product because bad news travels first. If your exosome isolation kit doesn't work, anybody in the exosome field is going to find out very, very quickly, and you're going to have to start again, etc. So I think sometimes you really need to make sure that it has to be a robust protocol that can be, anybody can use it, not just the technicians in your company.
And I might add a little bit to what both are saying and come at it from like the small company perspective. And I built instrumentation, built boxes, built, the software that runs it and those kinds of things. And one thing I see that happens a lot, particularly in technical products, is that the companies can often be very passionate about their own technology, but in all things, the success of a company is when you're passionate about your customers' problems, and hopefully your technology delivers that. And so, even if it's not ready, demos are great, even if it's janky a little bit, and that's where academics are actually quite good because they're willing to work with things that are a little bit rough on the edges and give you honest feedback. But what's important is really understanding why someone would use some of those things. And the reason I say that is because I've seen companies, we've occasionally fallen into that trap, but again, me not being a technical person, I've been able to kind of like stop our team from doing this, where the technical team might be polishing something that they think is really, really important for the product, but the customer literally doesn't care. It will not move the needle for their sales. It will not, add any value to what they're trying to do. And so part of the answer to this question is, what is the definition of ready? And the definition of ready is, does it reliably deliver what the customer actually wants to solve? And sometimes, like for example, I know the CEO of a company called Forte Bio that now is part of the Danaher and molecular devices portfolio. But the guy who ran that company all the way there, again, biosensors, big instrumentation, things like that. Their analytics was a macro that you downloaded off of Excel. It was not some polished software piece or anything like that. Everyone was fine with that. But they made sure they delivered really reliable answers at scale, and the instrument uptime was really, really good because that's what people cared about, right? So, what the definition of done has to be really focused on what's actually going to deliver the value the way the customer views that value, and everything else can be like, bare minimum, barely polished, and those kinds of things. And the customer's perspective has to come first rather than, the technical perspective of the definition of done. So
Right.
that's a trap I've seen a lot of companies fall into. So
Because you love building product.
hey,
It's
I
fun.
built a lot of them. Not all of them worked, but I built a lot of products. So yeah.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's wrap this section up on one final question here. So, how should you prepare for your first customer meeting? How do you sort of structure that meeting? What should you be discussing and asking on that first call? And when we had a follow-up here as well, I'm going to add on. So just kind of like, do you have any strategies or tips on like getting to available budget with customer discussions? Any thoughts or insights there? Uh,
That just the question of, what is their budget, what is their life cycle for buying, just ask. Most people can't help but tell you. You're always afraid to ask. Just ask. So what's your, when do you think you could buy this, or do you have the budget for this? We also sell instruments. If it's possible to do a demo unit, that helps out a lot. But just ask people, do you think you could buy this year? That helps you decide how much time I'm going to spend with you. The answer is no. You don't cut them off, but don't spend 30 minutes with them. Keep it shorter and move on.
I remember with my company, we had a tool, an instrument, a cheap instrument, relatively speaking, and I was trying to figure out how to price it, and somebody told me that with U.S. grants, there's a $5,000 discretionary budget for buying tools, and I'm like, that sounds good. Let's keep it simple. Um,
Understanding how the money works actually will change your product cycle, your sales cycle very, very quickly. Like that is a good important thing. If you can stay within those budgets versus something that's going to require 8 layers of approval and letters to a grant authorizer and all this other stuff. Yeah.
Alex, any follow up there?
No, I mean, you asked about what you want to be doing with your customer, your first customer visit, etc. I mean, I'm assuming this is to the cohort that you have. I mean, clearly, you really need to understand what's driving the customers. Where's the customer coming from? What is his pain points? You might not see that from his website, so you need to know what is he doing in his lab, who's he relying on? Does he, as Ross mentioned earlier on, does he have internal customers? Because that's also often the driver that, helps you understand how you can approach this product, etc. So I think a lot of it's just preparation, and I think most people would agree that, talking to a customer 80% of the time is not you talking, it's listening. It's the 80-20 rule is so important in many respects in commercialization of product. And listening is one of these things, because if you ask the right sort of questions, and our customers are not, most of them are quite expansive people. Even when you go into pharmaceutical companies, they might not tell you who, the active ingredient of what they're doing, but they're quite happy to tell you how important they are and how they fit into the bigger picture. And that paints for you a complete ecosystem that you can pick away at. And if you're a multi-product company, you can actually think of workflows. because I think we often don't think about workflows and where the other opportunities are. I mean, Revity is obviously built around a workflow process, having bought antibody companies and flow cytometry and software, etc. That's absolutely perfect. But understanding workflow gives you an awful lot of benefit further down the line, because you begin to understand where possibly some of the problems are when it comes to technical things, etc., if you do come across problems.
Yeah, and this is a little bit off topic, but David, I visited you a year or two ago, and you showed me around the facilities there, and you told me you guys had a number of SKUs, which blew my mind. What was that? What number of SKUs do you guys have? Do you?
I think at the moment we're just below, about 40,000 SKUs in our antibody, recombinant protein portfolio. So a lot of those can be one clone in a variety of colors, but we offer the rainbow because the customers want the rainbow. And adding to Alex's point, I think is have demonstrative data. Don't talk to me about in theory what you can do and try to sell me on it, because I'm not buying a theory. I'm buying a product that needs to perform, and it needs to perform in a real world setting. So a lot of times I see technologies come over and I go, great, well, how did you run that? Well, we ran it in the super clean lab and it was only done on one day, but these results were statistically significant. I want to see dirty, I want to see reproducible, I want to see multi-operator. So it's the data. You're selling to scientists, and the scientists are going to need to see if it performs better. Okay, then I'm interested. But if it's a theoretical performance, we can all draw graphs that look great. So
Right.
I think I want to add to that, you want to come in and be curious about people and ask them questions and listening, as said. But the budget question actually flows very naturally from another question that I think is really important, right? So first of all, you're getting that call because of some reason. You put something out there with marketing or LinkedIn, or you went to a partnering meeting and you said something about what you're doing and they agreed to the meeting. Okay, so right out of the gate, they have some issue they're thinking about, and maybe what you are offering might be able to help. So you start off your call by saying, hey, thanks for your time. And you reached out and said you want to have this meeting. Tell me a little bit about the problems that you're having and understand those kinds of things, right? And they'll tell you. They took the meeting, so they'll tell you exactly what their issues are and what it is that they're challenged with. The very, very next kind of question that should flow from that is every person in a job anywhere, whether they're an entrepreneur or whether they're in a big company, every person has 30 to 50 problems they're trying to solve. And for the most part, they can deal with the top five, and they'll rank order which ones are the most important for them, and they can deal with the top five. So the next question after that problem is, you want to try to qualify how important that problem is. If that problem is problem 10 on their list of 30, you may not be they may not be ready to buy your product, right? And you may want to know that, and you may want to try to process through those types of things. You hear this with another. There's a lot of terms that people throw around. There's an entrepreneur friend of mine that likes to use the term that they have a bleeding neck wound problem. That term really means the fact is, if you have a neck wound and it's bleeding out, that is your number one problem. And so, if you're solving the number one problem they have, then you say, okay, what's your budget to do this, and what's your timeline, and those kinds of things. It's a very natural question after knowing that this is the most important problem they're solving, or this is problem 15 on their list of 50, and maybe it's not quite as critical, but you're going to adjust your own strategy. It doesn't mean you can't sell if it's like further down the list, but it does mean that their bigger problems are going to take more of their attention away. And so you need to then think about how you make the buying process easier, because people will solve lower problems if it's very easy for them to solve. But if your product requires a lot of effort for them to come in, they may not want to buy your product if it's like way down here in their list versus their number one or number three priority that they need to solve. So
Right.
that's the objective, in my view, when I try to do a call, is help me understand what you're trying to solve, what this means to you, and how important it is in the broader scheme of things, and how this could enable your business, enable your customers, enable whatever you're doing.
So this moves me kind of to the next phase of our question, which is kind of converting those initial evaluations and trials into paid purchase orders. And I think you guys probably, I'm going to guess, have different perspectives on this. Um, I think the fear of the founders, if you give it away, maybe they don't actually like always do the work, or they don't respect, or it doesn't get prioritized, versus if they pay for it, there's like actual skin in the game and they'll probably get it done. So I'd love to hear from you, maybe starting with David. Like, how do you guys think about, this evaluation? You covered a little bit at the beginning with the long game, David, but maybe more short-term tactically.
Yeah, and so there's a few studies out there that are pretty well known, but people, when stuff's free, they'll waste it or won't use it. If they pay a little bit of money, even if it's a nominal amount, they feel like they have some skin in the game. So I always joke, why do we have a list price? Because we often discount from it, because that's just starting point for your negotiation. You make the customer feel like they got a significant discount. So hey, look, I could give you, how about I'll give you a 90% discount. So they're paying, whatever that is, again, for consumables. Then they can try it. Can you just share the data with us or let us know how it works? That'd be really helpful. It's a tough one. Like I said, students always want things for free, but they may not use them. So trying to find someone that's really interested is it's a harder one. But free samples or discounted samples make people feel like, okay, they're getting a deal. I'm happy to try it. You do follow up, so you'll find out pretty quickly that someone's never going to use it because they don't respond or they're busy. You just have to let those ones go. So you search for the ones that will respond to you, and help them. I mean, so I think we've touched a lot of it, but what solution are you providing, and be honest about what your capabilities are. I've talked to a number of companies or universities where I think I told Jim this, he liked the analogy, they promised me that their product or products can give me the sun and the moon. Okay, well, I'm a scientist, I'm going to question that, I'm going to be curious. In the course of conversation, I find, okay, it's actually just a flashlight. Then I'm disappointed. But if you came out of the gate and said, I have a flashlight, then I'm interested and I'll have a conversation with you. So don't overpromise and underdeliver. Have your pitch be, this is what we solve, we do it really well, and this is why we're better than the competition. So maybe a little off topic there, but just trying to focus you guys on what is it. Ask yourself why. Why are you doing it? What is it you do? And then how are you going to execute?
Yeah, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really argue with that. I mean, the only thing possibly that I would add to that is who is it the person you're giving the sample to? Because, is it somebody who's starting a PhD, or is it, a key opinion leader, etc. And therefore the commitment that you try to get from the individual. So I'm one of these reluctant sample givers. I mean, I think you've got to keep some value, on the table. Giving something away free is, to some extent, devaluing all the good work that somebody's done to develop the kit or to develop the instrument. Yeah. So I would like to try to make sure that the people who are taking the samples to the customers are people who have actually got a clear objective. What is the sample? What are you trying to do here? Are you trying to just have somebody get your new antibody into the literature? Well, that's great, because you've got first mover advantage. And if you're in there and the first publications are going out with the next NARCA-FARCA antibody, and it's going to be a real cool molecule that everybody's going to be looking at, you're going to make a ton of money on that. But if it's a me too, that's a tough one. And I think, do you use the sales guys to give samples out, or do you use marketing to give samples out? Because that's another aspect. Because then what you're trying to do with the sales guy is to say, are you making the sales guy's job easier to close the business, and you're paying this guy good resource to go out and do that? So I think often sometimes we get these two type of activities mixed up, and we end up having a rather expensive sampling program. So you can see I'm a little bit skeptical, Jim, on sampling.
Could you explain that a little more, what you mean between sales and marketing samples?
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly if you're out offering samples to people, and you can have your marketing, your inside salespeople, do the job, they cost you less than the sales guy. But clearly the sales guy sometimes is the person who knows the key person on the floor who's buying all the QIAGEN kits, and he thinks giving this guy a sample is good, and making sure he gets a commitment to get the sample tested is probably going to be worth it, because it's not just going to be one antibody. You're going to be selling 50 kits, and 50 kits a month rather than one antibody a month. So that's what I'm trying to say. You use marketing to do the sampling program. So you're introducing new technology, or introducing a new antibody, or maybe a new kit. Or if you're tackling a market that's more let's say more dominated in a bigger market, then potentially you would be using the salespeople, but they need to go back in as part of their tools. They can't just give a kit. They need to go back in and actually make sure they can close on the back of that.
Got it. And Ross, you sold more hardware focused tools along with the consumables.
Yeah.
When I had my company, we had a few loaners evaluation devices, and they did not do a good job of tracking their inventory. I still have a few devices that were evaluation units that were
Wow.
just kind of forgotten about. So I don't know that.
Yeah. I mean, that stuff happens. And I guess I would say, which to encompass even the stories from both David and Alex, don't give anything away for free. Now, you may not charge them money, but the key is it's very easy to give away free samples and then just get nothing out of it. If you're methodical about your approach, then you can get something out of it. So, for example, one of my very early customers at CRISPR QC was an academic lab at UCSD working on gene editing mosquitoes, which is a little bit of a niche thing and all sorts of stuff. But we accelerated the research by 18 months, and they loved it. They loved it to death. And the postdoc was kind of on her track to the next stage. She was being invited to talks. She was doing a bunch of different things. So we did some work for free for them. And we offered a service at the time, so we controlled all that. But we did some work for free for them, got the data, they found it worked, they published on it. But then she did a webinar for us. She did a YouTube testimonial. She spoke at conferences, and so we agreed with all that up front, saying, "Hey, I'll do this work. Does this add this extra novelty factor for your paper? Great." That plays out for our marketing, but also she agreed to just come over, do a webinar for an hour. She was already going to a conference, so we inserted a lot of our stories and she presented her story, and we led to like 20 more customer conversations after that, right? So, that it's not free, but it may not be money that you're exchanging, but make sure you're getting something out of it. And it takes a bit of thought to plan that, to say, is this person something that can turn into a number of other things that could make me a little more effective, down the road, right? It just takes more planning and thought to do that, but it can be very valuable if you're thoughtful about what you're getting back from them for those free things.
Okay. So I got one more time for one more question in this section, but this one comes from the one of our cohort companies. How do you speed up the sales cycle and position the product for easier approval inside the customer's organization? And what actually drives the decision, the data? Well, I'm sorry, what actually drives the decision? Is it the data, the demo, or being tied to a top priority in the organization? And I'll let any one of you who want to step in kick this one off.
I mean, for me, I would reiterate one piece, which, as I said, is your thing a priority? Find that out earlier. So for example, if you've got an instrument and let's say it's priced in like the $50,000, $75,000 range, different companies will have different authorizations for who has to make that decision for that budget and that capital expenditure. But sometimes that capital expenditure might take a long time. So in my space in biosensors, the big brand is BioCore. All of their instruments start at 200,000 and go up to $1 million. That sales cycle is 15 months. That with all the BioCore guys I've talked to, because they'll do demos in the first quarter, or talk to them in the sales cycle. They'll start doing demos in second and early third quarter. People say they like it, they get the feedback, and then they write the budget authorization in the third or fourth quarter. It gets approved in the fourth quarter. The budget gets authorized the first quarter after that, and then they make the sale. So understanding how the money works will actually increase your flow, and shorten that cycle and where those approval cycles are. We just talked a little about that with grants, where it's like if you can price under $5,000, any academic out there can buy it on the grant without an extra approval. Above five, there's layers of paperwork you got to do. Um, Understanding that budget cycle, that approval cycle will go faster throughout the organization if the problem you're solving is in their top priorities. Because then if it's got to go up to the CFO, but the CFO already knows this is a problem and we need a solution, he's going to authorize it because that's going to be his priority, to actually authorize what you're doing, to get the director to go buy your product and issue the purchase order and the whole thing. So the when you get good at understanding the sales cycle, matching people to the decision makers, and you can start, your objective in those first few calls is to really internally map, kind of like a sonar and ping, what is the actual decision tree? Where's the budget? What are their problems? Are you solving a core problem? And if you can answer those questions, you'll find the sales cycle go very quickly for customers that this is an immediate need. We all understand that this needs to happen, that kind of thing. If it's not an immediate need, the cycle is going to get a lot longer. It's just as simple as that. So,
All right. Thanks, Ross. All right. The next question I'd like to kind of maybe have Alex kick us off. All these early companies, the founder has to lead the sales organization at the beginning. That's part of the job and role, but at some point you got to transition. Do you have any thoughts, Alex, for sort of how companies and CEOs can manage that transition successfully? What have you seen work and not work with companies you've worked with?
Yeah. I mean, the companies I've worked with have had some really brilliant people. The founders of Invitrogen, for example, they were all great. Principally some of them scientists, and others were more commercial. I don't know. Maybe the question is, how long should a founder remain the company's primary salesperson? Sort of Because I think you have to, what needs to be in place in a company before the responsibility can be delegated. I think the easy thing is with brilliant founders, they've got an absolute belief in the vision of the company, so they're not sitting mulling over why we're doing this, etc. They've always mostly got deep understanding of the science and nuances, or if they're not a scientist, they pick that up. And I think the great thing is they would be able to make decisions on the spot. And I think making decisions on the spot with a customer, particularly if it's a difficult technical question, or maybe even a commercial question, like, can I get 50% discount, etc. So I don't know how many customers you have to get to before you all of a sudden then begin to want to scale that, because you can't, the founder isn't a scalable salesperson, so the company has to evolve that role. The founder can't go out and close all the deals and create all the sales processes. So, he has to start thinking about coaching others. So I think the step that's really important is the next commercial hire. And what do they do? That next commercial hire has to try to mirror what the founder's effectiveness was. So if the founder is really what's driving the sales and what's opening the opportunities, managing the pipeline, you'd need to be able to bring in somebody senior enough, somebody who's got the experience to try to effectively, multiply that effectiveness, and then you multiply that within the sort of growing organization that's there. And so the best commercial hires don't replace the founder. Again, as I say, they multiply the effectiveness the founder brings to us. So I think that's really the important aspect. I mean, it's always great. I've worked with companies, they send the founder over to Europe, and we've gone to see the big pharma companies or fast moving biotechs, and that founder's really, really brilliant. And then a year later, somebody's running the commercial division comes over and just doesn't really represent the same as what the founders was. So I think that real transition needs to be very, very well managed for people who are running businesses.
Ross, how about you? What surprised you, or what did you learn kind of walking that transition?
Yeah, so everyone on this call is an entrepreneur, and what makes an entrepreneur versus not an entrepreneur is, in my view on this, is that the job of a founder is to fail. That is your job. You got to go out there. You don't know exactly what's going to happen. You don't know how your sales process is going to work. You may not know why customers are going to buy your product. Your job is to go out there, try things, and fail, and learn, and iterate, and try again. And so, but what you'll find is that salespeople or distributors, they do not have a tolerance for failure. A salesperson's job is to come in, say, this is the cycle, this is how the process is going to work, and they're turning the crank and they're going out there, and their range of adaptability is within what is the uniqueness of this customer versus that customer, but ultimately they need to know why they're selling, what the value is, where the customers are coming in, where the leads are coming in, and how to transition them all the way through. And so if you're going to ask a salesperson that you hire to help figure that process out, they won't. I have failed at that many, many times. So your job as a founder is to go out and do sales, the early ones. And while you're trying to land sales, that's important. And you need that to scale revenue and all sort of stuff. What you're really trying to do is to create a process saying, why do people want what I want? How do we qualify their budgets? How do we get them to the purchase order? And then once you've got that, you test it and see, can I do that with another customer, another customer, another customer? Okay, great. This is working with 3 or 4 customers. The same process is working again and again. Now it's a sales guy. Now you scale because that guy can pick up what you just built and maybe iterate or improve it. But a blank sheet of paper, very, very few people can do that. So the founder's job is to take, I don't know what my sales process is going to be, but I'm going to go figure it out. I'm going to fail. And once it's working, I'm going to hand it off to someone else and go find the next thing to fail out until it works. And so that's usually, to me, the transition is to say, if you start getting a sense that you can go out, find a lead, qualify them, get them to an order, and do that repeatedly, now it's time to recruit a salesperson and get them to repeat that and scale that and bring that up. But the founder shouldn't. But asking them to come up with that process is almost always a recipe for disaster. So.
Yeah, Ross, it reminds me, one of my favorite shows is Silicon Valley,
I really hate that show because the first 2 seasons, every ridiculous thing that happened to them, I actually experienced it. It's very
right.
traumatic. It's very like trauma-inducing when I watch that show. I'm like, oh my God, but
So,
that
so,
actually happened.
so the
I
reason I
even
made there's
have a
a
3 comma guy in my cap table who was about as crazy as that guy too. So yeah, it's
well, in the later seasons, they built a sales team, and the engineers have built this perfect, beautiful product that is going to change the world. And they're like, we're the best engineers, you're the best sales team. And the sales team's like, yeah, we're not going to sell that. We're going to go
yeah.
sell this simple thing over here. And they're like, no, no, that's not at all the valuable thing we've built that's going to do any impact. And the sales guys are like, yeah, but that's what we're going to sell. That's easy. And they're like, but you're the best salespeople. And they're like, yeah, that's why we're selling that.
That's right. It's
But
exactly right.
but I think
So
it so encompasses this dichotomy you're talking about
yeah.
here as well. So. All right. We have 10 minutes left here in the main session. So I guess I would like to go to kind of the advice or thoughts on distribution versus direct selling. Um, and David, maybe you could kind of kick this off for us. So, how do you guys look at in your past or other roles and what you're doing right now, how do you guys look at distribution versus direct sales? Is it geographic based? Is it stage of the company based? How do you look at that?
So I think it's definitely going to be stage of the company. If you're smaller, you may need to rely more on distributors. At this point, BioLegend has always tried to stay away from distributors unless it's required by a certain jurisdiction like Japan or in a country like India where we maybe didn't have people on the ground. The reason is that your distributors are always going to mark up the products and they're not going to do a good job of selling them because they don't know what it is or why it's important. So if you can do direct sales, it's better. But again, there's a certain amount of overhead and cost associated with that. So the big one for us has always been that the distributors, even though we do distributor education, some are really good and you find good people and you continue to work with them. Other ones they just don't care. If you're another customer that they have a product that they distribute and they have no reason to push yours over another.
And yeah, Alex, do you have any thoughts there?
I think listening to the guys, today, I mean, if it's the first 12, the first year or so of your business, I mean, your objective is really rarely to maximize sales. I mean, what you're trying to be doing is fit the product to the market. You want to understand customer buying behavior. You want to have generating reference customers. No, I can understand that, BioLegend, doesn't, it's got its own structure out there. It needs to do it. But if you're a 5-man show, you want to have as many tools out there as possible because you want to try to get as many reference customers as possible. I'm sure somebody wants to be seen in the Max Planck Institute as much as he wants to be seen in the NIH because they're blue chip organizations, etc. I think you also are going through a whole iterative process about trying to understand, as Ross was saying earlier on, what is the repeatable sales process that you're doing so that you can maximize how you build your organization. So, I think it really depends on the stage you're in. I mean, I think a consumable product, the other question I've got, having made most of my money being a distributor historically over the years, is, the partnership is really important. And I think what you've got to think about your distributor is your partner. So it's almost like a dynamic equilibrium you have in chemistry. You have yourself sitting there as a distributor who's got the relationship with the customer, but he's also got the relationship supplier. And there's an openness there that I would say you need to have as a partnership deal. Now, there's going to be issues going forward as you grow and you want to take your company and you want to maybe raise a Series A, or you maybe want to take your company and really scale it. But I still think a distributor is in the marketplace who knows the languages, he knows how things work, he knows the local entities and the buying processes and the various regulations and what's the right shows to be, the vendor shows, etc. Because I mean, if you've got a piece of capital equipment, well, maybe you can find that out. But if you've got consumables or more simple purchases, kits, etc., I think I think a distributor is really quite important to be in place. They're good at finding the existing demand. The other thing about a distributor, they could be a stocking distributor for you. If you're sitting in North America and you want to ship to Czechoslovakia or Southern Ireland or Sweden, etc., I mean, you want to remove those hurdles as soon as you can, because your business isn't packing boxes and shipping them with TNT or FedEx across the Atlantic. You're wasting your time, guys. And so that you really need to think about a partnership with somebody on the ground. You're going to have hard decisions coming up because you might want to move that distributor, you might not perform. But the most important thing is it's like a customer. Go visit him, go see his team, go and get out there. Distributors, I think, will work with you, but you have to maintain the relationship with them, train them, and make sure that your products are setting up here, because every distributor's got a bunch of other products to sell. And it's back to the priorities. You want to be pushing your product up there into his top priorities. You're going to have to shave your margin because you're going to have to do that. But I think in return for that, you're going to have more sales longer term.
How do you know when you're ready to go international, or maybe more specifically, what are considerations companies should really consider before they expand their geographies?
Is that back to me?
And yeah, you can start it, Alex, but yeah, the others would love to hear their thoughts too.
I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's going to be product type dependent and stuff like that. I mean, are you offering a service, etc. I think if you've got something that really needs to be established because it's a technology, I think you really want to be trying to get out to the mature world. So I'm talking about the Germanys, the UKs, the Japans, the Singapores, because they have as many blue chip organizations as possible. I mean, if you think of something, I work very closely with Hans Clevers. It was an extracellular matrix protein that was coming from a small Maryland company competing against Corning. We managed to convince Clevers to move over, and the rest, and BME2 became the choice of ECM for the organoid space. Clevers is the guy who created organoids. It didn't really happen in the US. So I think you have to look at things that are really going to change the world. Techniques that will change the world is not going to be just US orientated. I mean, clearly the US is your biggest market. Your focus needs to be there. That's another reason for needing distributors, by the way.
Right.
I think it's in some ways you can almost look at it as a pure like cost benefit sort of analysis, right? So like right now I operate CRISPR QC as a service. People send me reagents, we analyze them in our instruments, we email them data, here's your results. Great. Like that's super easy. I can market cross-border all day long. People ship me reagents, and I deliver them their product, which is the results, via an email. And I mean, there's virtually no resistance to that kind of model. I will probably set up a small service center in Spain with this new collaborator I'm working with, mostly because I know I can set up a service center for me with about $50,000 in contract labor that books to revenue. So it costs me virtually nothing. And the point is it shipping stuff from within Europe is just a week or two faster and a lot easier than for someone sending me stuff from Europe over to San Diego is kind of like a little more of a challenge. But there's not much issue for me to be able to do that. Now, on the flip side, if you've got a system that requires shipping over there and you're going to have customs and you need to support it, occasionally with technical reps, and may have to come in and support them or give them the customer a little more hand holding, or if there's instrumentation or reagents that you need to pre-locate because people expect delivery in a day or two, and you've got freezer issues with reagents and things like that, then suddenly the cost becomes a lot higher. And it's like, maybe I need to think about how much I want to do that. But like for me, for example, operating as a service, I don't care where people live or where they're operated out of, because the overhead and cost for me to actually deliver something internationally is practically nothing. With the way that I've set up how I'm monetizing and how I'm delivering on the product, right? And my marketing is mostly, conferences and email and LinkedIn posts, and I generate leads that way. And it's like, so it's a very, very, very low bar for the way I've built that. But yeah, to Alex's point, it has a lot to do with what your product is, how you deliver value, and how much effort is involved with that cross border. The more you need people involved in helping to deliver the product, the more cross border becomes a real, real challenge. And you have to really prepare for that. So
David, any thoughts?
I would just be echoing what's already been stated. So I think I agree with the existing comments. So it's the on-time delivery, the time it takes customers to wait, that all of those influence whether to use a distributor. So I said, and I think Alex touched on it. BioLegend Revity, we don't do that now unless we absolutely have to. Smaller companies, I think you have to in the beginning. It's a requirement. Then once you get established, if you can pull away from distributors, it just depends on your relationship with them and how well they do for you versus some distributors just aren't great. So then you switch distributors or you put
And
someone on the ground. Yeah.
I think that's a great point, David. And I think it's also, to me at least, it was always important because if you have a distributor, you lose that direct voice of the customer that
Yeah.
you would get in the sales process.
So that's kind of what I was going to echo is the challenge with distributors is that, as much as they're your partner, they're also mercenaries. They're going to do what matters the most, that's going to make them the most value for them. You need a good process. And in the early days, going back to the earlier point I made, you need to figure out what the customer wants. And it's really, really hard to get that because the value of a distributor is in their customer relationships. That's how they land more companies like you. And so they're not necessarily motivated to provide all the information back. They will in different ways, but ultimately, you're one step removed from getting that direct feedback about the customer to help build your sales cycle and process. So a distributor can work again, whether you're hiring a salesperson or a distributor, as long as you have a process, you know the value proposition, you understand what the steps are and how to deliver that. And then is the distributor the right person to support the customer to be successful, or do you need to provide like a field application scientist to support the customer to be successful? What does customer success look like? Because every distributor wants to sell a product that the customer is happy with, so they come back and buy more products from them. And so you also need to think about, what does success look like afterwards? Can the distributor do that? Or is your product easy enough that they can pick it up and support the customer? Or do you need to provide customer support and customer success? And if it's I've always had very technical products. So we had our own field application scientists that traveled all over. And if you need to do that, then the distributor question becomes, again, very like product oriented and process and sales process oriented. And it becomes pretty clear once you understand those pieces and then say, yeah, okay, distributor is going to increase my sales by, I can take a 40% hit on my revenue because they're going to increase my customers by 300%. And it's like, okay, the net result's actually worth it. So we'll do it. That's usually where those conversations come in. But early days, I would say if they have to educate customers and you don't have yet the voice of customer, CEO's got to do it again, right? Until you understand that.
All right. Well, we got to stop it there for our first hour. So, want to give you guys a thanks. Don't go anywhere, but thanks and round of applause for the panel so far. Joe, we can go ahead and stop the live stream. And we will open it up here for questions in just a moment, but I do have a few announcements.